Grace Winters pressed 2 fingers against the child's wrist and counted heartbeats that came too fast, too weak. The little girl's skin burned like sun-heated stone. Her lips had gone pale blue at the edges. "Can you save her?" The man's voice cracked on the last word. Grace looked up at him, this stranger, whose daughter was dying, this widower, who'd let her into his home because he had no choice left. Outside, the Montana wind howled. Inside, death waited. Grace thought of her husband's last breath rattling in his chest, the promise she'd made never again. But some promises were meant to break. "Yes," she said. Before we go back to how Grace ended up here fighting for a child's life in a town that doesn't want her, hit that subscribe button. This story goes places you won't expect. And comment below with your city so I can see how far Grace's journey travels. Now let's rewind to yesterday, when everything started to fall apart. Montana Territory, January 18th, 1883. The stagecoach driver didn't wait for Grace to grab her trunk before snapping the reins. The horses lunged forward. Her carpet bag hit the frozen ground, spilling 2 books and a hair comb into the snow. "Wait!" Grace shouted. The coach was already disappearing into the white wall of the storm. Grace stood there, 32 years old, alone in a place that looked like the end of the world. Silver Creek wasn't a town. It was 12 buildings squatting in a valley between mountains that seemed ready to crush everything flat. The main street was frozen mud. Every building looked temporary, like someone might abandon it tomorrow. Her hands shook as she shoved her belongings back into the bag. Not from cold. From the letter folded in her coat pocket. "Dear Grace, come to Montana. Silver Creek needs a schoolteacher. I've found us a place. We can start over. Your sister Clara." That letter was 4 months old. Grace picked up her trunk heavy with everything she owned and started walking. Her boots crunched through ice. The wind cut through her wool coat like it was made of paper. She'd dressed for travel, not survival. The general store was dark. A sign in the window, closed until spring thaw. The church door was locked. The boarding house showed lamplight in one window. Grace climbed the steps and knocked. A woman's voice came through the door. "Who's there?" "Grace Winters. I'm looking for lodging." Silence. Then, "Are you married?" Strange question. "No, ma'am." "Then I can't help you." Grace pressed closer to the door. "Please, I can pay. I have money." "We're full up." The woman's tone said the conversation was over. Grace stood there, feeling the cold sink deeper. She knocked again, harder. "My sister Clara Winters lived here. I'm trying to find her." The door opened a crack. A woman peered out, 50 years old, hard-faced, wrapped in a shawl that probably cost more than Grace's entire trunk. Her eyes were the color of river ice. "Clara Winters," the woman said slowly. "Died 3 months ago. Consumption took her in November. We buried her in the town cemetery." She started to close the door. "Wait." "There's nothing more to say. Good evening." The door shut. Grace heard the bolt slide home. She stood on that porch and felt something crack open inside her chest. Clara, the last family she had. Gone. Grace had failed again. She walked down the steps carefully because her vision had gone blurry. Not crying, just the cold making her eyes water. She made it to the bottom before her knees gave out. She sat on the lowest step, her trunk beside her, and let herself feel the full weight of it. Boston, where the hospital board told her she wasn't suitable for nursing after Daniel died. Philadelphia, where the head doctor said she was too emotional. Pittsburgh, where she had lasted 3 weeks before someone discovered she was a widow and started asking questions about why she had no children. Was she barren? Was that why her husband died from disappointment? And now, Montana, where her sister had died alone. Grace tilted her head back. Snow fell on her face. She thought, I could sit here. Just sit here until I stop feeling cold. A door slammed somewhere down the street. Grace opened her eyes. Across from the boarding house sat a building with light blazing from every window. A painted sign swung in the wind. Fletcher's Saloon and General Store. Men's laughter rolled out into the frozen street. Grace stood up. She was done asking permission. She dragged her trunk across the street, hauled it up 3 steps and shoved through the door. Heat hit her like a wall. The smell came next. Whiskey tobacco smoke, wet wool, unwashed bodies. 8 men sat around tables playing cards. Every single one turned to stare. Grace let the door bang shut behind her. She stood there in her traveling dress, dark green wool good quality once, but now stained with mud and train soot. Her hair had come loose from its pins. She probably looked half frozen and completely desperate. She was both. Behind the bar stood a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and left to weather. Tall, maybe 6'2". Broad through the shoulders and chest. Dark hair cut short. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against tanned skin. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows. Flour dusted his forearms. His eyes were gray and completely unreadable. "We don't serve women," he said. His voice was low, roughened by the cold or by years of not talking much. "I'm not here for a drink." One of the miners, thick-necked with a crooked nose, grinned and elbowed the man next to him. "What are you here for, sweetheart?" Grace ignored him. "I'm looking for Clara Winters." The man behind the bar, Fletcher according to the sign, went very still. "You're her sister." Not a question. Grace felt something loosen in her chest. "You knew Clara?" "She worked at the boarding house." Fletcher picked up a glass and started drying it with a towel. "I'm sorry. She died in November." The finality in his voice made it real. Clara was gone. Grace gripped the handle of her trunk. "I came from Boston. I'm a nurse. Clara wrote that Silver Creek needed—" She stopped. What was the point? Is there anywhere in this town I can rent a room? "Martha Weaver runs the boarding house. She's particular." "She already turned me away." Fletcher set down the glass. For the first time, something that might have been sympathy crossed his face. "Then you're out of options." The thick-necked miner stood up. He was drunk, Grace could tell from the way he moved. He walked toward her slowly. "A nurse, huh? You any good with your hands?" The other men laughed. Grace felt her face heat, but she kept her voice level. "Sit down before you fall down." "Ooh, she's got spirit." The miner reached for her arm. Fletcher moved fast, crossed from behind the bar, and stepped between them in 3 strides. He didn't raise his voice. "Touch her, and I'll break your arm, Cooper." Cooper blinked. You were just leaving." Fletcher's tone didn't change. "All of you. We're closed." "It's barely 8 o'clock. Closed means closed." Fletcher looked at each man in turn. Nobody argued. They filed out slowly, shooting glances back at Grace. Cooper was last. He paused at the door. "You're making a mistake, Sam." "I've made worse." The door closed. Silence filled the room, just the crackle of the stove and the wind outside. Fletcher Sam turned to look at her. "You said you're a nurse." "Yes." "What kind?" "I trained during the war. Field hospital in Virginia. After the war, I worked at Massachusetts General." "Why'd you leave?" Grace met his eyes. "That's not relevant." "It is if you're lying about your credentials." "I'm not lying." Sam studied her face. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "Can you set a broken bone?" "Yes." "Stop bleeding?" "Yes." "Treat pneumonia?" Grace hesitated. "Depends on how advanced it is." "What about rheumatic fever?" Her stomach dropped. "Is someone sick?" "My daughter, Rose." Sam's jaw tightened. "She's 7. Been sick 3 days. Fever, joint pain, can't keep food down. She's getting worse." Grace understood immediately why he'd thrown out the miners. Why he was still standing here talking to her instead of throwing her out too. "Have you seen a doctor?" "Our doctor died in a mining accident last October. There's nobody." Sam's hands clenched at his sides. "I've been trying everything. Willow bark tea, cold compresses. Nothing's working." "Where is she?" "Upstairs. But before I take you up there—" Sam moved closer. "I need to know if you can actually help her. Not try. Not maybe. Can you help her?" Grace looked at this man, this stranger whose daughter was dying, and saw the same desperation she'd felt when Daniel was coughing blood, and the doctors kept saying there's nothing more we can do. She could lie. Tell him yes, absolutely, I can save her. Buy herself shelter for a night. But Grace had failed to save one person she loved. She couldn't promise to save another. "I don't know," she said, "but I'm the only chance you have." Sam stared at her for 5 long seconds. Then he turned and walked toward a door behind the bar. "Follow me." The stairs were narrow and dark. Sam carried a lamp, and Grace followed him up, her medical bag clutched in one hand. The second floor was surprisingly clean, a hallway with 4 doors. Wallpaper, not bare wood. Curtains in the windows. Sam opened the second door on the left. The room was small and warm. A stove burned in the corner. The bed was covered with quilts, must have been 5 or 6 piled on top of each other. Underneath them, Grace could see a small shape curled on its side. She crossed to the bed and knelt. The girl was tiny small for 7. Dark hair spread across the pillow, damp with sweat. Her face was flushed red with fever, her lips cracked and dry. Her breathing came fast and shallow. Grace touched the girl's forehead. The heat was intense. "Rose," Sam said quietly. "This is Grace. She's here to help." Rose's eyes opened gray like her father's. They were glazed, unfocused. "Mama." Grace's throat tightened. "No, sweetheart. Just a friend." She pulled back the quilts. Rose wore a nightgown too big on her small frame. Grace unbuttoned it and examined the girl's chest. A faint rash spread across her ribs, red spots slightly raised. Grace pressed gently on Rose's abdomen. The girl whimpered. She checked Rose's wrists and ankles. Both were swollen, the joints puffy and hot to the touch. Grace sat back on her heels. She'd seen this before. Field Hospital, 1864. Young soldier, barely 16. Same symptoms. He'd died 3 days later when the infection reached his heart. She looked up at Sam. "It's rheumatic fever. Do you know what that is?" "No." "It's an infection that attacks the joints and heart. It's serious." Grace chose her words carefully. "If we don't treat it aggressively, it can be fatal." Sam's face went absolutely white. "Can you save her?" Grace thought about the soldier, about Daniel, about all the patients she'd lost. But she also thought about the ones she'd saved. The amputations that didn't get infected. The fevers that broke. The children who lived. "I'll need supplies," she said. "Willow bark, honey vinegar, clean cloth, a basin for water. And she needs complete bed rest. No movement at all for at least 2 weeks. I have most of that downstairs. What else?" "Time." Grace looked down at Rose. "And luck." Sam left without another word. Grace pulled a chair close to the bed and took Rose's hand. The girl's fingers were burning hot, but she gripped back weakly. "Listen to me, Rose," Grace said softly. "You're very sick, but I'm going to stay with you and make you better. I need you to hold on. Can you do that?" Rose's eyes focused on her for just a moment. "Promise." Grace thought about all the promises she'd broken. To Daniel that she'd make him comfortable. To herself that she'd never practice medicine again. "I promise," she said. The next 18 hours blurred together. Grace mixed willow bark tea and spooned it into Rose's mouth a sip at a time. She made a syrup from honey and vinegar to coat Rose's throat. She wrapped the girl's swollen joints in cool compresses, changing them every hour as they warmed. Sam brought everything she asked for without question. Water boiled, clean cloths, a ceramic basin, more willow bark. He didn't hover, didn't ask questions, just brought what she needed and left. Around midnight, Rose started shaking. Not from cold, from fever spikes. Grace stripped away the quilts and sponged her down with cool water working quickly. Rose cried out delirious calling for her mama. "I'm here," Grace murmured. "You're safe." She didn't leave the bedside except to use the chamber pot. She ate nothing. Drank water when Sam forced a cup into her hands. At 3 in the morning, Grace dozed off in the chair, still holding Rose's hand. She woke to footsteps. Sam stood in the doorway holding a blanket. He crossed the room silently and draped it over her shoulders. "Sleep," he said quietly. "I'll watch her." "I can't. You'll be useless if you collapse." Sam pulled up a second chair. "I'll wake you if anything changes." Grace wanted to argue, but her eyes were burning, her back aching. She leaned forward, resting her head on the edge of the bed, and let exhaustion take her under. She woke 2 hours later to Sam's hand on her shoulder. "Her fever broke," he said. Grace sat up fast. Rose was sleeping, really sleeping, not the half-conscious fever state. Her color was better. Her breathing had slowed. Grace pressed her fingers to Rose's wrist. The pulse was still fast, but stronger, more regular. "She's past the crisis point," Grace whispered. Sam didn't say anything. He just sat back in his chair and covered his face with his hands. Grace looked away, giving him privacy. After a minute, Sam cleared his throat. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. She's not out of danger. The fever could return. The joint inflammation could worsen. She needs at least 2 more weeks of constant care." "Then you'll stay 2 weeks." Grace turned to look at him. "Mr. Fletcher." "Sam. Sam, I appreciate the offer, but—" "It's not an offer. It's necessity." Sam leaned forward, forearms on his knees. "You said she needs constant care. I can't provide that and run the business downstairs. You're a nurse. You can. So you'll stay until Rose is well." "Where would I sleep?" "There's a room across the hall. It's yours." "What about payment?" "Room and board, 3 meals a day." Sam met her eyes. "And if you can teach Rose her letters while you're here, I'd be grateful. She's smart, but stubborn about learning." Grace should have said no. She'd just met this man. She'd be living under his roof, unmarried, unchaperoned, in a town that had already made clear what it thought of women like her. But Rose needed her, and Grace needed somewhere to belong, even temporarily. 2 weeks, she said. "After that, we'll reassess." Sam nodded once. "I'll bring up your trunk." He stood and left. Grace looked down at Rose. The girl was sleeping peacefully now, one small hand curled under her chin. She looked so young, so fragile. Grace thought about Clara buried in frozen ground, about Daniel dead 3 years, about all the ways she'd failed the people she loved. Not this time, she thought. This one lives. Then, when Grace woke the second time, sunlight was streaming through the window. She jerked upright. How long had she slept? And looked immediately at the bed. Rose was awake. Her eyes were clear. "Hello?" the girl said. Her voice was hoarse but steady. Grace crossed to the bed and pressed her hand to Rose's forehead. Warm, but not burning. "How do you feel?" "Tired, and my arms hurt." "That's the illness. It'll get better." Grace poured water into a cup and held it to Rose's lips. "Drink slowly." Rose drank, then lay back. "Are you a doctor? A nurse?" "What's the difference?" "Doctors tell you what's wrong. Nurses make you better." Rose considered this. "I like nurses better." Grace almost smiled. "Me too." "Are you staying for a while?" "Good." Rose's eyes started to drift shut. "Papa needs help. He's sad all the time." Before Grace could respond, Rose was asleep again. Grace stood there feeling the weight of those words. Papa needs help. A knock on the door made her turn. Sam stood in the hallway holding a tray coffee bread, what looked like scrambled eggs. "Figured you'd be hungry," he said. Grace's stomach growled in response. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. "Thank you." Sam set the tray on the small table by the window. He glanced at Rose. "She awake?" Briefly, she drank some water. "That's good." Sam shifted his weight. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, stubble on his jaw. "I need to open the store. Will you be all right up here?" "Yes. If you need anything, bang on the floor. I'll hear it." He started to leave, then paused. "Miss Winters." "Grace." "Grace." He said her name carefully, like he was testing how it felt. "I owe you more than room and board. You saved my daughter's life. She's not out of danger yet. But she's alive, because of you." Sam looked at her directly. "Whatever you need while you're here, anything at all you ask. Understand?" Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. Sam left. Grace sat down at the table and ate mechanically. The eggs were good, cooked with butter and salt, not the watery mess most men made. The coffee was strong and hot. She was finishing the last of the bread when she heard voices downstairs. Male voices raised loud enough to carry through the floorboards. Grace moved to the door and opened it a crack. "Don't care what you think, Cole. She stays as long as Rose needs her." "I'm just saying, Sam, people are going to talk. You've got an unmarried woman living under your roof. Doesn't look right." "Since when do you care about what looks right?" A pause, then a different voice, smooth and educated. "I care about this town's reputation. We're trying to attract investors. Silver Creek needs to present itself as civilized, not some lawless camp where men and women cohabitate without marriage." Grace's hands clenched on the doorframe. "Grace isn't cohabitating," Sam said, and she could hear the anger in his voice now. "She's nursing my sick daughter. Then hire her properly. Pay her wages. Put her up at the boarding house where she belongs. Martha won't take her." "Well, whose fault is that?" Silence. Then footsteps, someone leaving. Grace closed the door and leaned against it. Her heart pounded. She'd been in Silver Creek less than 24 hours, and already people were talking. 3 days passed. Rose improved steadily. The fever stayed away. The swelling in her joints decreased. Her appetite returned. Grace supervised everything: what she ate, when she slept, how often she moved. Sam ran the business downstairs and brought meals up 3 times a day. They spoke little. Grace got the sense he wasn't a man who wasted words. But she noticed things, like how there was always coffee ready when she came out of Rose's room in the morning, like how he'd fixed the broken latch on her bedroom door without mentioning it, like how he sat with Rose every evening and read to her from a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe, his deep voice gentling on the words. On the 4th day, Grace woke to Rose sitting up in bed trying to braid her own hair. "Rose Fletcher, what do you think you're doing?" Rose looked up guiltily. "I'm bored." "Bored is good. Bored means you're getting better." Grace sat on the bed. "But you're still on bed rest. Give me that brush." Rose handed it over. "Will you braid my hair?" "If you promise to stay in bed." "I promise." Grace worked through the tangles carefully. Rose's hair was thick and dark like her father's. "Your papa said you're stubborn about learning your letters." "Letters are boring." "What's interesting to you?" "Stories. Papa reads to me every night, but I want to read them myself." Grace smiled. "Then we'll make a deal. I'll teach you to read if you promise to rest while you're learning." Rose twisted to look at her. "Really? Really? Can we start today?" "Tomorrow. Today you rest." Rose settled back against the pillows. "Grace. Are you going to leave when I get better?" Grace's hands stilled on the half-finished braid. "I don't know yet." "I hope you don't." Rose's voice was small. "I like having you here." Grace finished the braid in silence, her throat tight. On the 5th day, a woman came to the door. Grace heard Sam's voice from downstairs. "Martha, what brings you here?" "I need to speak with Miss Winters." Grace's stomach sank. She checked on Rose sleeping and went downstairs. Martha Weaver stood in the saloon, looking around like she'd walked into a den of sin. She was dressed in severe black, her iron gray hair pulled back tight. When she saw Grace, her mouth thinned. "Miss Winters?" "Mrs. Weaver. We need to talk." Martha glanced at Sam. "Privately." "Anything you say to her, you can say in front of me," Sam said flatly. Martha's eyes hardened. "Very well. Miss Winters, you've been living under Mr. Fletcher's roof for 5 days now. Unchaperoned. Unmarried. I'm caring for his daughter." "So you say. But appearances matter, Miss Winters. This town has standards." Grace felt anger spark hot in her chest. "Standards? You turned me away when I had nowhere to go. A woman I'd never met died alone, and you couldn't be bothered to—" Clara Winters was a charity case who couldn't pay her bills. Martha's voice was ice. "I fed her for 2 months before consumption took her. Don't lecture me about compassion." The words hit Grace like a slap. Clara had been destitute, dying, and this woman had what grudgingly allowed her to stay. "Get out," Sam said quietly. Martha turned to him. "You're making a mistake, Samuel. People are talking. Duncan Cole came to me yesterday. He's concerned about the moral character of this town." "Duncan Cole can go to hell. He's talking about bringing this to the territorial government. There are laws, Samuel, morality clauses. A man living with an unmarried woman raising a child in such an environment, you could lose custody of Rose." The room went dead silent. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "What? It's true." Martha looked between them. "If the territorial judge decides Rose is being raised in an immoral household, he can remove her from your custody, place her with a proper family." Sam's face had gone white. "You're lying." "I'm not. Ask the minister if you don't believe me." Martha's expression was almost satisfied. "Miss Winters needs to leave, today, or you'll lose your daughter." Grace's mind raced. She thought about Rose upstairs finally healing, about Sam who'd trusted her to save his daughter, about the way this rough little room had started to feel safe. "I'll go," she heard herself say. "Grace," Sam started. "No, she's right." Grace looked at Martha. "I'll pack my things. I'll be gone within the hour." Martha nodded sharply. A wise decision. She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Miss Winters, your sister spoke of you often. She believed you'd come." Something that might have been pity crossed her face. She was wrong about a lot of things. The door closed behind her. Grace stood there feeling the weight of it all. Clara's death, the town's judgment, the impossible choice between staying and endangering Rose or leaving and abandoning her. "Don't," Sam said. Grace looked at him. "Don't what?" "Don't leave." He took a step closer. "Martha's trying to scare us. Duncan put her up to it. He wants this building, and he'll use whatever leverage he can find." "But what if she's right? What if they can take Rose? They won't." "You can't know that." "I know that Rose needs you, that she's healing because of you, that if you leave now she might—" His voice cracked. He stopped, jaw clenched. Grace felt tears burn behind her eyes. "I can't be the reason you lose her. You're the reason I still have her." Sam moved closer. "Listen to me. I don't give a damn what Martha Weaver thinks, or Duncan Cole, or anyone else in this town. You stay as long as Rose needs you, as long as you want to. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." "Sam, I mean it." His gray eyes were fierce. "You saved my daughter's life. I won't let them drive you out." Grace stared at him. At this man who barely knew her, but was willing to fight an entire town for her. She thought about all the places she'd run from. All the times she'd let people push her out, rather than stand her ground. She was so tired of running. 2 weeks, she said quietly. You promised me 2 weeks. I'll stay that long, and then we'll see. Sam's shoulders dropped slightly relief. Thank you. Grace nodded and turned to go back upstairs. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. Grace? She looked back. For what it's worth, Sam said, I'm glad you're here. Something warm uncurled in Grace's chest. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she just nodded and kept walking. Behind her, she heard Sam return to the store. The clink of bottles. The scratch of pen on paper. Grace climbed the stairs and went to Rose's room. The girl was awake, looking at her with worried eyes. I heard voices, Rose said. Was that Mrs. Weaver? Yes. Is she making you leave? Grace sat on the bed and took Rose's hand. No, sweetheart. I'm staying. Rose smiled, the first real smile Grace had seen from her. Good, because you're the best nurse I ever had. I'm the only nurse you've ever had. Still the best. Grace squeezed her hand gently. Then she picked up the slate and chalk she'd found downstairs. Now, let's start with the letter A. That night, after Rose was asleep and the saloon was quiet, Grace sat in her room and tried to make sense of what she'd agreed to. She'd stay 2 weeks, maybe longer. In a town that didn't want her, living under the roof of a man she barely knew, caring for his daughter while gossips like Martha Weaver tried to destroy them both. It was reckless, stupid, exactly the kind of thing that had gotten her in trouble before. But for the first time since Daniel died, Grace felt like she was doing something that mattered. Rose was healing. Sam trusted her. She had a purpose beyond just surviving. Grace pulled out the letter from Clara, the one that had brought her here. She read it again slowly. Come to Montana. Silver Creek needs a school teacher. I've found us a place. We can start over. Clara had been wrong about the school teacher job. Wrong about having a place ready. Wrong about so many things. But maybe she'd been right about one thing. Maybe they could start over. Grace folded the letter carefully and tucked it away. Then she blew out the lamp and lay down in the narrow bed. Through the thin wall, she could hear Sam moving around in his room. The creak of floorboards. The sound of a window opening to let in the cold night air. Grace closed her eyes and let the sounds lull her toward sleep. She was still awake an hour later when she heard a soft knock on her door. Grace? Sam's voice quiet. Rose is asking for you. Grace was up and across the hall in seconds. Rose was sitting up in bed, her face pale in the lamplight. What's wrong? Grace pressed her hand to Rose's forehead. No fever. I had a bad dream, Rose whispered. About Mama. She was calling me, but I couldn't find her. Grace sat on the bed and pulled Rose against her side. The girl was shaking. It was just a dream, sweetheart. But what if I forget what she looked like? Sam stood in the doorway, his face stricken. Grace looked at him, then back at Rose. Do you have a photograph of her? Papa does, in his room. Then we'll look at it tomorrow, every day if you want. You won't forget. Rose nodded against her shoulder. Will you stay until I fall asleep? Of course. Sam retreated silently. Grace stayed stroking Rose's hair, humming a tune her own mother had sung to her once. Eventually, Rose's breathing evened out. Grace started to stand, but Rose's hand caught her nightgown. Don't leave, the girl murmured, half asleep. So Grace stayed. She leaned back against the headboard, Rose curled against her side, and listened to the wind outside. She was still there when dawn light crept through the window. And when she finally opened her eyes, Sam was standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. He held one out to her without speaking. Grace took it carefully, trying not to wake Rose. The coffee was hot and strong. Sam sat in the chair by the door, cradling his own cup. They sat in silence as the sun rose, neither of them speaking, Just two people watching a child sleep, grateful she was alive. And Grace thought, maybe this is what home feels like. By the end of the second week, Rose could sit up without help. By the third, she was walking short distances across the room, holding Grace's arm for balance. The swelling in her joints had disappeared. Her color came back. She laughed again, a sound that made Sam stop whatever he was doing and just listen. Grace taught her letters in the mornings. They used a slate and chalk, Rose's small hand gripping the chalk tight as she traced the shapes. A for apple, B for bird. By the fourth week, Rose could write her own name. "Look, Papa." Rose held up the slate proudly one evening. "I wrote it myself." Sam took the slate and studied it like it was something precious. "That's real good, Rosie." "Grace taught me. She's a better teacher than Miss Pritchard ever was." "Who's Miss Pritchard?" Grace asked. "The old school teacher," Sam said. "She left last year when the mines started cutting wages. Most families couldn't afford to pay her anymore." Rose tugged on Grace's sleeve. "You could be our teacher. Stay here and teach all the children." Grace's throat tightened. "I'm a nurse, sweetheart, not a teacher." "But you're teaching me." "That's different." Rose's face fell. Sam caught Grace's eye over his daughter's head, his expression unreadable. Grace looked away first. That night, after Rose was asleep, Grace stood at her bedroom window and stared out at the street. Snow had fallen again, covering everything in white. The boarding house across the way showed lamplight in two windows. She wondered if Martha Weaver ever looked out and saw her standing here. Wondered what the woman thought. A knock on her door made her turn. "Come in." Sam entered carrying a small wooden box. "Found something that belonged to Rose's mother. Thought you might want it." Grace took the box carefully. Inside was a silver hairbrush tarnished with age and a small leather-bound book. "Mary kept a journal," Sam said quietly. "She wrote about Rose in there, about being a mother." He shifted his weight. "Rose asked me today if you were going to be her new mama. I told her no. But I thought maybe if you read some of what Mary wrote, you'd understand why she asks." Grace opened the journal. The handwriting was neat, careful. October 12th, 1877. Rose said her first word today. "Papa." Sam cried. I pretended not to notice. "I can't take this," Grace said. "I'm not giving it to you, just letting you borrow it." Sam moved to the door. "Mary would have liked you. You're both stubborn as hell." He left before Grace could respond. Grace sat on the bed and read. Mary Fletcher had been 23 when she married Sam, 24 when Rose was born. She wrote about the hard Montana winters, about learning to run the store, about loving a man who showed affection through actions instead of words. The last entry was dated March 1878. Rose is 2 years old today. She has Sam's eyes and my stubborn streak. I pray every night that she inherits his strength. She'll need it in this hard place. 3 months later, Mary was dead. Childbirth. Sam had mentioned once. The baby hadn't survived either. Grace closed the journal and pressed it against her chest. She understood now why Rose looked at her with such desperate hope. Why Sam let her stay despite the gossip. They weren't just seeking a nurse. They were trying to fill a void that could never really be filled. And Grace was starting to realize she was trying to fill one too. She didn't sleep well that night. When she finally dozed off, she dreamed of Daniel. Not the sick, dying Daniel from the last months. The healthy one who used to wake her with coffee and terrible jokes. In the dream, he looked at her sadly. "You're allowed to live," he said. "I'm not coming back, Grace." She woke with tears on her face. The next morning, Grace went downstairs to find the saloon full of men. Not miners this time, men in suits. Duncan Cole stood at the bar talking to Sam, and 3 other men flanked him like guards. Grace started to retreat, but Duncan's voice stopped her. "Miss Winters, how convenient. We were just discussing you." Grace forced herself to walk down the last few steps. "Mr. Cole." Duncan smiled. He was handsome in a polished way. Clean-shaven hair, pomaded back expensive suit. Everything about him said money and power. "I was telling Sam here that the territorial government has expressed interest in Silver Creek's development. They're considering funding for a proper schoolhouse." "That's good news," Grace said carefully. "It is, but they're concerned about the town's moral character. Specifically, they've heard troubling reports about improper living arrangements." Duncan's smile sharpened. "You understand their concern, I'm sure." Grace's hands clenched in her skirts. "I'm caring for a sick child. For over a month now. Rose looks quite healthy these days. Perhaps it's time for you to find your own accommodations." "Perhaps it's time for you to leave my establishment," Sam said flatly. "We're closed. It's 9 in the morning. For you, we're closed." Duncan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went hard. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, Sam. I'm trying to help you. By threatening me. By offering solutions." Duncan gestured to one of his men who produced a document from his coat. "I'm prepared to purchase this building from you. Fair price. Enough to set you and Rose up somewhere more suitable." "I'm not selling." "Think about Rose. Think about what's best for her." "I am thinking about her. That's why you need to get out." Duncan set the document on the bar. "The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, I'll be forced to take more direct action." He tipped his hat to Grace. "Miss Winters, always a pleasure." He left with his men trailing behind. The moment the door closed, Sam slammed his fist on the bar. The bottles rattled. Grace had never seen him this angry. "Sam, don't." He held up a hand. "Just don't." Grace waited. After a long moment, Sam spoke again, his voice carefully controlled. "Duncan's been trying to buy this building for 2 years. He wants to tear it down, build a hotel. Prime location, right on Main Street." Sam looked at her. "He doesn't care about morality or Rose or anything else. He cares about money. But if he can use the territorial government..." "He's bluffing. There's no law against you staying here." Martha was exaggerating. "Duncan's counting on me not knowing that." "How do you know?" "Because I asked the minister." Sam's jaw tightened. "Duncan Cole doesn't get to dictate how I live my life, or who stays in my home." Grace moved closer. "But if he makes things difficult..." "He's already making things difficult. That's what bullies do." Sam met her eyes. "Question is, are you going to let him scare you off?" Grace thought about Boston, Philadelphia, all the times she'd run rather than fight. She thought about Rose upstairs, probably awake by now, waiting for her reading lesson. "No," she said. "I'm not." Sam nodded once. "Good." He turned back to organizing bottles behind the bar. Grace watched him for a moment, then headed upstairs. But halfway up she heard voices outside, women's voices raised in argument. Grace went to the front window and looked out. Martha Weaver stood in the street with 2 other women Grace didn't recognize. They were staring at the saloon, talking animatedly. One of them pointed directly at the window where Grace stood. Grace stepped back, her heart pounding. Upstairs, Rose was sitting up in bed working on her letters. She looked up when Grace entered. "I heard shouting. Just some people outside. Angry people." Grace forced a smile. "Doesn't matter. Let's practice your vowels." But Rose wasn't fooled. "They're mad because you're staying here, aren't they?" "Rose. I heard Papa talking to the minister last week. About laws and custody and..." Rose's voice trembled. "They want to take me away because of you." Grace sat on the bed and took Rose's hands. "Listen to me. Nobody is taking you anywhere. Your papa won't let that happen. But what if they do? What if they make me go live with Mrs. Weaver? She's mean. She made me eat porridge even when I was sick. And..." Rose was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want you to leave. You're the closest thing to a mama I've had, and I know you're not really my mama, but I pretend sometimes, and..." Grace pulled Rose into her arms and held her while she sobbed. Over the girl's head, Grace saw Sam standing in the doorway, his face stricken. When Rose finally cried herself out, Grace tucked her back into bed. "Rest now. Will you be here when I wake up?" "Yes." "Promise." Grace thought about all her broken promises. "I promise." Rose closed her eyes. Grace waited until her breathing evened out, then followed Sam out into the hall. He closed the door carefully behind them. "She's scared," Grace said quietly. "I know. She thinks they're going to take her away." "They're not." Sam's voice was hard. "But what if Duncan—" "He won't." Sam turned to face her fully. "I need you to understand something. I've lost one person I loved to this town's judgment. I won't lose another." Grace's breath caught. "Sam." Mary was pregnant when she died. The midwife who was supposed to attend her refused to come because Mary owed her money. By the time I found someone else, it was too late. His hands clenched at his sides. The midwife was Martha Weaver's sister. Martha knew. She could have helped. She chose not to. Grace felt sick. "I'm so sorry. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand why I don't give a damn what Martha Weaver or Duncan Cole or anyone else in this town thinks." Sam's gray eyes were fierce. "You stay as long as you want. If they want to fight about it, let them come." Grace wanted to say something, but her throat was too tight. Sam held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and went back downstairs. Grace stood in the hallway shaking. She thought about Mary dying because someone chose money over mercy. About Rose terrified of losing another mother. About Sam carrying that grief and anger for 5 years without breaking. And she thought about herself. About how many times she'd run instead of standing her ground. Not this time. Grace went to her room and pulled out the carpet bag she'd arrived with. At the bottom, wrapped in cloth, was Daniel's pocket watch. She'd carried it from Boston to Philadelphia to Montana, unable to let go of the last piece of him. She held it now, feeling its familiar weight. Daniel's initials were engraved on the back: DHW. Time waits for no man. "You were right," Grace whispered. "Time doesn't wait, and I can't keep living in the past." She wrapped the watch back up carefully and put it away. Then she went to check on Rose. 3 days later, a man knocked on the saloon door at dawn. Grace heard it from her room. 3 sharp raps that made Sam's footsteps pound down the stairs. She pulled on her robe and opened her door a crack. A young miner stood on the threshold, his face pale. "Mr. Fletcher, I need the nurse. My brother's been hurt bad. Mining accident." Grace was down the stairs before Sam could respond. "Where is he?" "Our cabin. Half-mile past the mine entrance." The miner looked at Sam. "I can pay." "She's not for hire," Sam said. "She's—" "I'll come." Grace interrupted. She looked at Sam. "Rose is sleeping. I'll be back before she wakes." "Grace, you can't just—" "Yes, I can. That's what nurses do." She turned to the miner. "Give me 5 minutes." She dressed quickly, grabbed her medical bag, and followed the young man out into the pre-dawn darkness. Sam appeared in the doorway as they left. "Be careful," he said. Grace nodded and kept walking. The cabin was small and filthy. The injured man lay on a cot, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Another miner stood nearby, wringing his hands. "Tunnel collapsed," the young miner explained. "Beam came down on his leg." Grace knelt beside the cot and examined the leg. Compound fracture, she could see bone through the torn flesh. The man was semi-conscious, moaning in pain. "I need clean watercloth for bandages and whiskey," Grace said. "And something to use as a splint. 2 straight pieces of wood about this long." The miners scrambled to gather supplies. Grace cleaned the wound as best she could with the filthy water they brought her. The man screamed when she straightened his leg. She worked quickly, setting the bone, binding it tight to the makeshift splint. "He needs a real doctor," Grace said when she was done. "This will hold for now, but infection is likely." "Nearest doctor's in Helena," the young miner said. 3 days' ride." "Then you better get him there fast." Grace packed up her bag. Change the bandages twice a day. If the skin around the wound turns black or starts to smell rotten, he'll lose the leg. She left them with instructions and walked back toward town. The sun was rising now, painting the mountains gold and pink. Grace's hands were shaking from cold or adrenaline, she wasn't sure. When she reached the saloon, Sam was standing on the porch. He'd been waiting. "Rose?" Grace asked. "Still sleeping." Sam came down the steps. "You okay?" "Compound fracture. Said it as best I could." Grace's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "He might lose the leg anyway." Sam took her medical bag. "Come inside. You're freezing." Grace let him guide her into the warm saloon. He poured coffee and pressed the cup into her hands. She drank it automatically. "You saved that man's life," Sam said. "Maybe. Or maybe I just delayed the inevitable." Grace set down the cup. "Sam, those miners saw me leave your establishment at dawn. Unchaperoned. You know what people will say." "Let them say it." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." Sam moved closer. "You're a nurse. You answered a call for help. Anyone who twists that into something improper can go to hell." Grace wanted to believe him, but she'd seen how quickly reputation could be destroyed, how easily whispers became accusations. "I should check on Rose," she said. She went upstairs, feeling Sam's eyes on her back. Rose was awake, sitting up in bed. "Where were you?" "A miner was injured. I helped him." "Are you leaving?" Rose's voice was small. "No, sweetheart. I'm staying." "Promise?" Grace sat on the bed and took Rose's hand. "I can't promise forever, but I promise I won't leave without saying goodbye. Is that enough?" Rose nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Grace spent the morning teaching Rose her letters, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about the injured miner, about Duncan's threat, about the way this town seemed determined to push her out. Around noon, someone knocked on the front door. Grace heard Sam's voice, then a woman's. She went to the top of the stairs and looked down. Martha Weaver stood in the saloon, flanked by 2 other women Grace recognized from the boarding house. All 3 looked up at Grace with identical expressions of disapproval. "Miss Winters," Martha said. "We need to speak with you. Now." Grace came down the stairs slowly. Sam moved to stand beside her, a wall of silent support. Martha's eyes swept over Grace's dress, still wrinkled from this morning, a bloodstain on one sleeve. "I've heard disturbing reports that you left this establishment before dawn unchaperoned and returned hours later." "I was treating an injured man." "So you say." Martha's voice was ice. "But witnesses report seeing you enter a cabin with 2 unmarried men, alone, for over an hour." Grace felt her face heat. "I was setting a broken leg, not—" "What you were doing is irrelevant. What matters is how it appears." Martha stepped closer. "Miss Winters, you're destroying what's left of your reputation. And worse, you're dragging Mr. Fletcher and his daughter down with you." "That's enough," Sam said. "Is it?" Martha turned on him. "Your daughter was seen crying yesterday. Crying because children at the Mercantile told her that her father keeps a woman. Do you want Rose growing up with that shame?" Sam's face went white. "Get out." "I'm trying to help you." "You're trying to control me, the same way you tried to control my wife." Sam's voice was dangerously quiet. "You let Mary die, Martha. You and your sister. And now you want to take away the woman who saved my daughter's life. So let me be very clear. Get out." Martha's face flushed red. "You'll regret this, Samuel Fletcher. When the territorial judge comes next month, I'll make sure he hears all about your household arrangements. About Rose being raised by a fallen woman. about your utter lack of moral judgment." She turned and swept out, her companions hurrying after her. The silence that followed was crushing. Grace sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. "I'm making everything worse." "You're not. Rose was crying because of me. Children are mocking her because this town is full of small-minded hypocrites." Sam crouched in front of her chair. "Grace, look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "You saved Rose's life," Sam said. "You saved that miner's life this morning. You're the best person in this godforsaken town, and they hate you for it because you make them look at their own failures." His hand covered hers. "Don't let them win." Grace looked down at their joined hands. Sam's palm was calloused and warm. She turned her hand over, threading her fingers through his. "I don't know how to fight this," she whispered. "Then we'll figure it out together." Grace wanted to believe him, but as she sat there holding hands with a man she was starting to love, she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. And she was right. That night Grace woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, heart pounding. Smoke was seeping under her door, gray wisps that curled toward the ceiling. "Fire!" Grace screamed. She threw open her door and ran across the hall to Rose's room. Rose was already awake, coughing. "Grace, come here." Grace grabbed Rose and wrapped her in a blanket. Smoke was thicker in the hallway now, stinging her eyes. Sam appeared from downstairs, his face grim. "Storeroom's on fire. We need to get out now." They ran down the stairs. Heat rolled up from below. Through the smoke, Grace could see orange flames licking up the back wall where Sam kept supplies. Sam kicked open the front door, and they stumbled out into the cold night. Other doors were opening along the street. People emerged in nightclothes, staring. "Stay here," Sam said. He turned back toward the building. "Sam, no." Grace grabbed his arm. "I have to stop it before it spreads." He pulled free and ran back inside. Grace stood in the street, holding Rose, watching smoke pour from the upper windows. Her throat was tight with fear. If Sam didn't come out, Minutes passed like hours. Then Sam emerged coughing, his face blackened with soot. Behind him, 3 miners carried buckets of water, throwing them on the flames. More men joined the fight. They formed a line from the town well to the saloon, passing buckets hand over hand. It took an hour to kill the fire completely. When it was over, Sam's storeroom was destroyed. The back wall was charred black. Water damage had ruined most of the supplies in the saloon. Duncan Cole appeared from the crowd. "Terrible accident." Sam turned on him. "This was no accident. You can't prove that." "The hell I can't. That fire started in a locked storeroom. No lamps, no stove. Someone set it deliberately." Duncan spread his hands. "If you're accusing me..." "I'm not accusing. I'm stating fact." Sam took a step closer. "This is your last warning, Cole. Stay away from my property. Stay away from my family. Or the next fire won't be accidental either." Duncan's smile vanished. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm making a promise." They stood facing each other, neither backing down. Finally, Duncan turned away. "You should take my offer, Sam, before something worse happens." He disappeared into the crowd. Grace stood there, shaking Rose pressed against her side. The girl was crying silently, her face buried in Grace's nightgown. Sam came over to them. "You both all right?" "We're fine." Grace's voice came out hoarse. "Sam, he tried to kill us." "He tried to scare us. There's a difference." Sam looked at his ruined storeroom. "But he just made a mistake." "What do you mean?" "I mean he showed his hand too early." Sam's jaw was set. "Now I know exactly what I'm dealing with." They spent the rest of the night at the minister's house. Reverend Walsh was an old man with kind eyes who asked no questions, just gave them blankets and let them sleep on his floor. In the morning, Grace and Rose returned to the saloon while Sam surveyed the damage. The back wall would need to be rebuilt. Most of his inventory was ruined. It would cost money he probably didn't have. Grace found him in the storeroom, standing amid the wreckage. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough." Sam picked up a charred piece of wood. "I'll need to close the store for at least a week, maybe 2. That's 2 weeks of no income." Grace thought of Daniel's pocket watch still wrapped in cloth in her carpet bag. It was gold well made. It would fetch a decent price. "I have something I can sell," she said. Sam looked at her. "No." "Sam, no." His voice was firm. "This isn't your burden to carry." "It is if Duncan burned your store because of me." "He burned it because he's a bully who's used to getting his way. Because I wouldn't sell. This has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me." Grace's voice rose. "If I wasn't here, none of this would have happened. Rose wouldn't be getting mocked by other children. You wouldn't be facing ruin. I should have left when Martha first—" "Stop." Sam grabbed her shoulders. "Just stop. You're not leaving. I won't let you." "You can't stop me. Watch me." His hands tightened. "Grace, I know you're scared. I know you've been hurt before, and you think the solution is to run. But running doesn't fix anything. It just means you're alone when the next bad thing happens." Grace's eyes burned. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything." "You're not. You're the reason I have anything worth keeping." Sam's voice softened. "Rose is alive because of you. This building is just wood and nails. It can be rebuilt. But if you leave, if you take yourself away from Rose, from me, that's something I can't rebuild." Grace stared at him, her heart pounding. "Sam." He leaned in and kissed her. It was brief, gentle, and it felt like coming home. When he pulled back, his eyes searched her face. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "I shouldn't have." Grace grabbed his shirt and kissed him back. This time it wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry, and full of all the loneliness they'd both been carrying. Sam's arms came around her, pulling her close. Grace fisted her hands in his shirt, holding on like she was drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Please." Grace thought about all the times she'd run, all the places she'd left behind, all the chances she'd refused to take. "I'll stay," she said. The kiss changed everything and nothing. Sam didn't mention it again, and Grace didn't bring it up. They worked side by side, rebuilding the storeroom, their hands touching occasionally, both of them pretending not to notice. Rose watched them with knowing eyes that were far too old for 7. "Are you and Papa getting married?" she asked Grace 3 days after the fire. Grace nearly dropped the bucket of water she was carrying. "Rose, because if you are, I think you should do it soon, before Mrs. Weaver gets the judge to take me away." "Nobody's taking you anywhere." "But they might. Unless you marry Papa. Then they can't say anything bad because you'd be proper." Rose tilted her head. "Don't you want to marry him?" Grace set down the bucket and crouched to Rose's level. "It's not that simple, sweetheart." "Why not? You like him. He likes you. I like both of you. That's how families work." "Sometimes adults have to think about more than just what they like." Rose's face fell. "You're going to leave, aren't you? Just like Mama did." "Your Mama didn't leave. She died. That's different." "It feels the same." Rose's voice was small. "Everyone I love goes away." Grace pulled her close. Over the girl's head, she saw Sam standing in the doorway. He'd heard everything. His face was carefully blank, but his hands were clenched at his sides. That night, after Rose was asleep, Grace found Sam on the back porch. He was smoking a cigarette, staring out at the mountains. She'd never seen him smoke before. "Didn't know you did that," she said. "I don't, usually." Sam took a drag. "Found this in the wreckage. Half a pack survived the fire. Seemed like a sign." Grace sat beside him on the step. The night was cold and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt. "Rose asked me about marriage today," Grace said. Sam didn't respond for a long moment. Then, "What'd you tell her?" "That it's complicated." "Is it?" Grace looked at him. "Isn't it?" Sam stubbed out the cigarette on the porch rail. "I loved Mary, still do in a way, but she's been gone 5 years, and I'm tired of living like I died with her." He turned to face Grace fully. "I know you're scared. I know you've been hurt. But I'm asking anyway. Stay. Not as Rose's nurse. Not as a guest. Stay as my wife." Grace's breath caught. "Sam, I'm not asking because of Duncan or Martha or what people say. I'm asking because when I wake up, I think about you. When I go to sleep, I think about you. When that fire started, the only thing that mattered was getting you and Rose out safe." Sam's voice was rough. "I don't care if it's too soon or too fast or too anything. I want you here. Permanently." Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I want that too." "Then marry me." "I can't." Sam went very still. "Why not?" Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "Because you deserve someone whole. Someone who isn't broken and scared and running from her past." "You think I'm not broken, Grace? I let my wife die because I was too proud to beg Martha's sister for help. I've spent 5 years hating myself for it. We're all broken here." Sam reached out and tilted her chin up, making her meet his eyes. "The question isn't whether we're damaged. It's whether we're brave enough to try anyway. What if I fail you? What if I can't be what Rose needs? You already are what she needs. What we both need." Sam's thumb brushed away her tears. "I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for real." Grace thought about Daniel, about the promise she'd made to never love anyone like that again, about how loving meant risking loss, about how every time she'd run, she'd ended up more alone. "Ask me again in a month," she whispered. "If we're all still standing after Duncan makes his next move, if Rose is still healthy, if I'm still sure," Sam finished. "I'll be sure in a month, a year, 10 years. Then ask me in a month." Sam nodded slowly. "1 month. But Grace, I'm not giving up." "I know." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. They sat like that until the cold drove them inside. The next morning brought Martha Weaver and 5 other women to the saloon door. Grace heard their voices before she saw them, sharp and righteous, like knives wrapped in prayer. "We demand to speak with Miss Winters," Martha announced when Sam answered the door. "She's busy." "This cannot wait." Martha pushed past him. The other women followed like a flock of black crows. They arranged themselves in the saloon, faces set in identical expressions of disapproval. Grace came down the stairs slowly. She'd been helping Rose with her reading, and the girl clung to her skirts, now frightened by the invasion. "Mrs. Weaver," Grace said, "what's this about decency?" Martha's voice rang out. "Morality. The protection of innocent children from corrupting influences." "Rose, go upstairs," Sam said quietly. "But Papa—" "Now." Rose fled. Grace heard her door close upstairs. Martha stepped forward. "Miss Winters, we represent the Ladies' Committee for the Preservation of Community Standards. We've come to give you a choice." "What kind of choice?" "Leave Silver Creek voluntarily within 24 hours, or we will petition the territorial judge to remove Rose Fletcher from her father's custody on grounds of moral corruption." The words hit Grace like physical blows. Sam started forward, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "You would take a child from her father," Grace said slowly, "because I'm staying here as a nurse." "You're not here as a nurse anymore, Miss Winters. The child is well. You're here as something else entirely. Something this town will not tolerate." "And if I leave?" "Then we will drop our petition. Sam Fletcher may keep his daughter provided he conducts himself appropriately from now on." Grace looked at Sam. His face was white with rage, but his eyes were on her, pleading silently. Don't give in. Don't let them win. But Grace was thinking about Rose upstairs, probably pressing her ear to the door, listening to strange women threaten to take her away. About Sam, who'd already lost one person he loved to this town's cruelty. About how sometimes love meant sacrifice. I'll go, Grace said. No. Sam's voice was sharp. Grace. I'll leave tomorrow morning. You have my word. Martha nodded, satisfied. A wise decision. Perhaps there's hope for your soul after all. The women filed out. The moment the door closed, Sam rounded on Grace. What the hell do you think you're doing? Protecting Rose. By abandoning her. By making sure she stays with you. Grace's voice broke. Sam, they mean it. They'll take her away and put her with Martha or some other family, and you'll never... Then we'll fight them. With what? You can't afford a lawyer. Duncan owns half the territorial government. Martha has the church behind her. We can't win this. So you're just giving up? I'm choosing Rose over my own happiness. That's what parents do. Grace turned away before he could see her crying. I'll pack tonight. She went upstairs before Sam could argue further. In her room, she pulled out her carpet bag and started folding her few belongings. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the fabric. A soft knock made her turn. Rose stood in the doorway, her face blotchy from crying. You're leaving. I have to. No, you don't. You could marry Papa. Then you'd be my real mama, and they couldn't make you go. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Rose's voice rose. You're just scared. You're scared like I was scared when Mama died. But being scared doesn't mean you should run away. Grace knelt in front of her. Rose, if I stay, they'll take you from your Papa. I can't let that happen. If you go, you're taking yourself away. That's worse. Rose wiped her eyes angrily. I thought you were brave. I thought you were different. But you're just like everyone else who leaves. She ran out before Grace could respond. Grace sat on the bed, Rose's words echoing in her head. You're just like everyone else who leaves. She thought about her mother who died when Grace was 10, about Daniel, whose death had sent her running, about Clara, who she'd arrived too late to save, about how she'd spent 3 years leaving before anyone could leave her first. A heavier knock sounded. Sam filled the doorway, his face hard. I'm not letting you do this, he said. You don't have a choice. Neither do you, because I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to listen. Sam came into the room and closed the door. When Mary died, I blamed myself. Thought if I'd been stronger, richer, better, I could have saved her. Spent 5 years carrying that guilt. And then you showed up, this stubborn, scared woman who'd been running so long she forgot how to stand still. And you saved my daughter's life. Grace shook her head. Sam, I'm not finished. You saved Rose, but you also saved me. Made me remember what it felt like to want something besides just survival. And now you're trying to leave because you think that's noble. That's sacrifice. But it's not. It's just another way of running. I'm trying to protect you. Then stay and fight with me. Fight for Rose. Fight for us. Sam's voice gentled. Grace, I know you're scared of losing people, but you can't lose what you never let yourself have. Grace looked at him through tears. What if we lose anyway? Then at least we lose together. She thought about Rose's words, about being brave, about how 3 years of running had left her more alone than any loss ever had. 1 month, she said. You asked me to give you 1 month. I did. What if I give you 1 day instead? Grace stood up and faced him. 1 day to figure out how to fight Martha and Duncan and win. If we can't find a way by tomorrow morning, I leave. But if we can... She took a breath. If we can, I'll marry you. Sam stared at her. You're serious? Completely. Grace's hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear, from something that felt like hope. So we have until dawn. What do we do? Sam's mind was already working. She could see it in his eyes. We need leverage, something that makes Martha and Duncan back down. Like what? I don't know yet, but I know someone who might. Sam grabbed his coat. Stay with Rose. I'll be back in an hour. Where are you going? To talk to someone who hates Duncan Cole almost as much as I do. He left before Grace could ask more questions. She stood there for a moment, then went across the hall. Rose was curled on her bed, face buried in her pillow. Rose? The girl didn't move. Grace sat on the bed. You were right. I was scared. I am scared. But I'm going to try to be brave anyway. Rose rolled over. Her eyes were red and swollen. You're staying. If your papa can figure out a way to beat Martha and Duncan, we're working on it right now. Really? Really? Grace smoothed Rose's hair. But I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to think very hard about everything you've heard the adults say. About Duncan, about Martha, about anyone. Anything that seemed strange or important. Rose screwed up her face in concentration. Mrs. Weaver visits Duncan's office a lot. I saw her going there twice when Papa sent me to the mercantile. When was this? Last month, and then again after the fire. Rose sat up. And I heard her telling Mrs. Patterson that Duncan promised her first choice of rooms in the new hotel he's building. Grace felt something click into place. The hotel Duncan wants to build here. On Papa's land. Rose nodded. Mrs. Weaver was excited about it. She said she'd finally have proper competition instead of running the only boarding house in town. Grace's mind raced. If Martha was working with Duncan, if she'd been promised benefits in exchange for driving Grace away, then the whole petition about morality was a sham. It was just business dressed up as righteousness. But how to prove it? Sam returned 2 hours later with Reverend Walsh. The old minister looked troubled. Tell them what you told me, Sam said. Reverend Walsh settled into a chair, his hands shaking slightly. 3 weeks ago, Duncan Cole came to me. He said the ladies' committee was concerned about improper living arrangements. He asked if I would testify before the territorial judge about Sam's moral character. What did you say? Grace asked. I told him I'd seen no evidence of impropriety, that you were clearly caring for Rose, nothing more. The Reverend's voice was sad. Duncan was not pleased. He suggested that my church's roof needed repair, that the congregation was shrinking, that perhaps a generous donation from the mining company could solve both problems. He tried to bribe you, Grace said. Yes, and when I refused, he suggested that my position in Silver Creek might become untenable, that a minister who couldn't maintain his congregation might need to seek opportunities elsewhere. Sam leaned forward. Did he say anything else? He mentioned Martha Weaver, said she'd be much more cooperative than I was being, that she understood how business worked in Silver Creek. Reverend Walsh looked at Grace. I'm sorry, Miss Winters. I should have warned you sooner. I thought if I stayed quiet, Duncan would lose interest. I was wrong. Grace's hands clenched. He's been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. Since before you arrived, Sam said grimly. The fire, the petition, all of it. He knew you'd eventually care about Rose and me enough to leave, rather than see us hurt. He was right. Grace looked at Reverend Walsh. Would you testify to this, to Duncan's bribe attempt? I would. But I'm an old man, Miss Winters. Duncan will say I'm senile. Martha will support him. It'll be my word against theirs. Not if we have proof, Sam said. He turned to Grace. Rose told you about Martha visiting Duncan's office. Yes. What if there's a record payments agreements, something in writing? How would we get access to Duncan's records? Sam smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. I know someone who cleans his office. She owes me a favor. It took until midnight to arrange everything. The cleaning woman, a widow named Sarah Chen, who'd borrowed money from Sam to bury her husband, agreed to look through Duncan's desk. What she found was better than Grace had hoped. A signed agreement between Duncan and Martha, dated 6 weeks before Grace arrived in Silver Creek. In it, Duncan agreed to give Martha the first 3 rooms in his new hotel rent-free for 5 years, in exchange for her help removing obstacles to the development of Main Street properties. The agreement specifically mentioned creating social pressure on current property holders to sell. Sarah copied it by hand, working by lamplight, her fingers cramping. She brought the copy to Sam's back door at 2 in the morning, her face pale with fear. "If he finds out," she whispered. "He won't," Sam promised. "You were never here." With the document in hand, Sam, Grace, and Reverend Walsh went to the minister's house. They woke the judge's clerk, a nervous young man who'd taken the stagecoach from Helena 3 days ago for Duncan's petition hearing. "This is highly irregular," the clerk protested. "So is bribery and extortion," Sam said. He showed the clerk the agreement. "Duncan Cole and Martha Weaver have been conspiring to force me off my property. They're using morality as a smokescreen for land theft." The clerk read the document, his eyes widening. "If this is authentic, it is," Sarah Chen said, stepping out of the shadows. Grace hadn't known she was following them. "I copied it myself, from Duncan Cole's private ledger. There are others like it. Agreements with the mercantile owner, with the assayer, with 6 people in this town." "Why are you telling me this?" the clerk asked. "Because I'm tired of being afraid." Sarah's voice was steady. "Duncan Cole has been bleeding this town dry for years, making deals, forcing people out, taking what isn't his. Someone needs to stop him." The clerk looked at Reverend Walsh. "You'll testify to the bribery attempt." "I will." "And you, Miss Winters, you're at the center of this petition. What do you want?" Grace thought about running, about how easy it would be to just leave, let Duncan and Martha Wynne disappear into another town where nobody knew her story. Then she thought about Rose asking if she was brave. "I want to stay," Grace said. "I want to marry Sam Fletcher and help raise his daughter and practice nursing in this town, and I want Duncan Cole to answer for what he's done." The clerk nodded slowly. "I'll speak to the judge. The hearing is scheduled for 10 this morning. Be there." They left as dawn was breaking. Grace's whole body felt electric with exhaustion and adrenaline. Sam walked beside her, close enough that their arms brushed. "You said you'd marry me if we found a way to fight," he said quietly. "I did. Is the offer still good?" Grace stopped walking and turned to face him. The sun was just touching the mountains, painting everything gold and pink. Sam's face was tired and unshaven, his eyes shadowed with worry. He looked like a man who'd spent the night fighting for everything he loved. "Ask me properly," Grace said. Sam took her hands. "Grace Winters, will you marry me? Not because of Duncan or Martha or what anyone says. Because I love you. Because you're brave and stubborn, and you saved my daughter's life. Because when I think about my future, you're in it." Grace felt tears on her face again. Happy tears this time. "Yes." Sam pulled her close and kissed her right there in the middle of Main Street as the sun came up. When they broke apart, Rose was standing on the saloon porch in her nightgown, grinning. "Finally," the girl said. "I thought you were never going to ask." The hearing took place in the church at 10 o'clock sharp. The judge was a severe-looking man named Thaddeus Carr, with white hair and sharp eyes. Duncan sat on one side with Martha and her ladies' committee. Sam, Grace, and Reverend Walsh sat on the other. Judge Carr read the petition slowly. Then he looked at Martha. "Mrs. Weaver, you allege that Miss Winters is living in an improper arrangement with Mr. Fletcher. That Rose Fletcher is being raised in an immoral household. Do you have evidence beyond hearsay?" "We have witnesses, Your Honor. People who've seen Miss Winters coming and going from the Fletcher residence at all hours. People who've observed improper familiarity between her and Mr. Fletcher." "I see." Judge Carr turned to Sam. "Mr. Fletcher, how do you respond?" Sam stood. "Miss Winters has been staying at my property as a nurse for my daughter, who was seriously ill with rheumatic fever. She saved Rose's life. As for improper familiarity, we're engaged to be married. I proposed last night. She accepted this morning." A murmur ran through the room. Martha's face went red. Duncan's expression didn't change. "Convenient," Duncan said. "A sudden engagement right before the hearing." "Nothing sudden about it," Sam said. "I've been in love with her for weeks. Just took me this long to say it." Judge Carr's expression might have been a smile. "Be that as it may, an engagement doesn't negate Your Honor." Reverend Walsh stood. "I have information relevant to this case." "Proceed." The Reverend testified about Duncan's bribery attempt, his words clear and certain. The clerk produced the agreement between Duncan and Martha. Sarah Chen confirmed its authenticity. By the time they were finished, Duncan's face was ashen, and Martha looked ready to faint. "Mrs. Weaver," Judge Carr said, "did you enter into an agreement with Mr. Cole to create social pressure on property holders?" That document is taken out of context. It's a simple question, yes or no. Martha's mouth worked silently. Finally, yes. And the purpose of this petition against Miss Winters was to force Mr. Fletcher to sell his property to Mr. Cole. No, the petition is about morality and Mrs. Weaver. Judge Carr's voice was ice. "I've been presiding over territorial cases for 20 years. I know the difference between genuine moral concern and land speculation dressed up as righteousness. You've wasted this court's time and attempted to separate a child from her father for financial gain." He turned to Duncan. "As for you, Mr. Cole, I'll be recommending to the territorial governor that your business practices be investigated. Extortion, bribery, conspiracy. These are serious charges." Duncan stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You have no authority." "I have all the authority of the territorial government, Mr. Cole, and I suggest you sit down before I add contempt to the list of charges." Duncan sat. Judge Carr looked at Grace. "Miss Winters, you're free to stay in Silver Creek and pursue whatever living arrangements you choose. This petition is denied." He banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned." The room erupted. Martha fled her ladies' committee, scattering like startled birds. Duncan stormed out, his men following. People swarmed Sam and Grace, offering congratulations, asking questions. Through it all, Grace felt like she was floating. They'd won. Actually won. Rose pushed through the crowd and grabbed Grace's hand. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" "Forever," Grace promised. "And you're going to be my real mama?" Grace knelt down. "If you'll have me." Rose threw her arms around Grace's neck. "I'll have you." Over the girl's shoulder, Grace met Sam's eyes. He was smiling, really smiling, not just the ghost of one. He mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Grace shook her head. "Thank you," she mouthed back. That afternoon, Reverend Walsh married them in the church. Rose stood between them, holding both their hands. There were no flowers, no fancy dress. Just 3 people becoming a family in a room full of witnesses who'd finally decided to be kind. When Reverend Walsh said, "You may kiss your bride," Sam cupped Grace's face in his hands and kissed her gently, like she was something precious. Grace kissed him back and thought about all the time she'd run, all the places she'd left behind. She was done running. That evening they stood on the porch of the saloon, their saloon now, and watched the sun set behind the mountains. Rose was inside, already asleep from excitement. Sam's arm was around Grace's waist, holding her close. "You think Duncan will try again?" Grace asked. "Probably, but we'll be ready." "And Martha?" "She'll move back to St. Louis where her sister lives. Already heard her making arrangements." Sam pulled Grace closer. "We won, Grace. Against all odds, we actually won." Grace leaned into him. "What happens now?" "Now we live. We raise Rose. We build something good here. That's simple." "That's simple." Sam kissed the top of her head. "Welcome home, Mrs. Fletcher." Grace smiled against his chest, Mrs. Fletcher. It felt strange and wonderful. and right. She thought about the woman who'd arrived in Silver Creek 2 months ago, broken, scared, running from her past. That woman would barely recognize who Grace had become. Someone brave enough to stand her ground. Someone worthy of being loved. Someone who'd finally found where she belonged. 3 days after the wedding, Grace woke to find Sam's side of the bed empty. She pulled on her robe and went downstairs. He was in the storeroom, hammering new boards into place where the fire had eaten through the wall. His shirt was already damp with sweat, despite the morning cold. "You should have woken me," Grace said. "I could help." "You were sleeping. Figured you earned it." Sam didn't stop working. "Besides, I've been building things since I was 12. Got a rhythm to it." Grace watched him for a moment. The way his shoulders moved under the fabric. The concentration on his face. 3 days married, and she was still getting used to the idea that this man was her husband. That she had a right to stand here watching him work. "Rose is still asleep," she said. "Good. Let her rest. She had nightmares again last night." "I heard. About the fire. About losing people." Sam set down the hammer and turned to face her. "She's scared we're going to disappear. That this is all temporary." "It's not." "I know that. You know that. But Rose has lost her mother, almost lost me to grief, almost lost you to Duncan's scheming. She's 7 years old, and she's already learned that people leave." Sam's jaw tightened. "I don't know how to fix that." Grace moved closer. "We don't fix it. We just stay. Every day we stay. Eventually she'll believe it." "You sound sure." "I am sure. Because I'm that scared child too. The one who learned people leave. And I'm choosing to believe anyway." Grace took his hand. "We'll teach her together." Sam pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. They stood like that until footsteps on the stairs made them break apart. Rose appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Are you fighting?" she asked nervously. "No, sweetheart," Grace said. "Just talking. About me." Sam crouched down. "About how lucky we are to have you." Rose studied his face like she was checking for lies. Finally, she nodded and came over to hug him. Over her shoulder, she looked at Grace. "Can we have pancakes? If you help me make them." They spent the morning in the kitchen, Rose standing on a stool to reach the counter. Grace showed her how to measure flour, how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl. Sam rebuilt the storeroom wall, the sound of his hammer a steady rhythm underneath their conversation. Around noon, someone knocked on the front door. Grace wiped flour from her hands and went to answer it. Sarah Chen stood on the porch holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Mrs. Fletcher," Sarah said, and Grace still wasn't used to that name. "I brought bread, as a wedding gift." Grace took the basket, touched. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to. You and Mr. Fletcher stood up to Duncan when nobody else would. That took courage." Sarah glanced back at the street. "A lot of people in town are grateful. They're just scared to show it yet." "I understand." Sarah hesitated, then leaned in closer. "There's talk that Duncan's not done, that he's going to contest the judge's ruling. Say the evidence was obtained illegally." Grace's stomach dropped. "Can he do that?" "I don't know. But he's been meeting with lawyers from Helena, spending money he shouldn't have if his business was as successful as he claims." Sarah straightened. "Just thought you should know. Be careful." She left before Grace could ask more questions. Grace stood there holding the bread basket, feeling the weight of Sarah's warning settle over her shoulders like a yoke. Sam appeared from the storeroom, saw her face. "What's wrong?" Grace told him. Sam's expression went hard. "Let him try," he said. "We'll beat him again. What if we can't? What if he has enough money to buy the right lawyers, the right judge? Then we fight anyway." Sam took the basket from her hands and set it aside. "Grace, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. Duncan's not the type to accept defeat. There'll be more threats, more challenges, maybe for years." "I know." "And you're still willing to stay." Grace thought about Boston, about Philadelphia, about all the places she'd run to escape exactly this kind of fight. Then she thought about Rose in the kitchen, about the weight of Sam's ring on her finger, about finally having something worth defending. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Sam kissed her forehead. "Good, because I need you here." That afternoon, Grace walked to the mercantile to buy supplies. The storekeeper, a thin man named Horace, watched her approach with wary eyes. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said cautiously. "What can I do for you?" Grace handed him a list. Flour, salt, sugar, coffee. Basic staples they'd need for the next 2 weeks. Horace filled the order silently, his hands shaking slightly as he wrapped the packages. When Grace pulled out money to pay, Horace shook his head. "No charge. I insist on paying. Duncan used to charge me protection money, 10% of my profits every month, or he'd drive customers to Helena instead. Judge Carr put a stop to that. I figure I owe you." Horace pushed the packages across the counter. "Consider it a wedding gift." Grace's throat tightened. "Thank you." As she gathered the supplies, 3 women entered the mercantile. Grace recognized 2 of them from Martha's Ladies' Committee. They saw her and stopped whispering among themselves. Grace braced for confrontation. Instead, the oldest woman, Mrs. Patterson, stepped forward. "Mrs. Fletcher, I wanted to apologize. For the petition. For believing Martha's lies. We were wrong." Grace didn't know what to say. "I thank you. Martha's leaving town tomorrow, going back east where her sister lives. She won't be causing trouble anymore." Mrs. Patterson twisted her hands together. "Some of us were thinking we need a nurse in Silver Creek, someone who actually cares about healing people, not just collecting fees. Would you be interested?" Grace's heart started beating faster. "You want me to practice here officially? If you're willing. We can't pay much, but we'd make sure you had supplies, and respect." Mrs. Patterson's voice softened. "We should have given you that from the start." Grace thought about the injured miner she'd treated weeks ago. About Clara, who'd died alone because no one came to help. About all the people in this town who needed someone who wouldn't turn them away. "I'll do it," she said. "But I have conditions." "What conditions?" "No one gets turned away for lack of money. Ever. If someone needs care, they get it. We'll figure out payment later." Mrs. Patterson nodded. "Agreed. And I want to train others. Young women who want to learn nursing. This town needs more than one person who knows how to set bones and deliver babies." "You want to start a school?" "A training program. Nothing formal. Just teaching what I know." Grace picked up her packages. "If the town agrees to that, I'll serve as your nurse." Mrs. Patterson smiled, the first genuine smile Grace had seen from any of these women. "I'll bring it to the town council, but I think you'll find people agreeable." Grace walked home with supplies in her arms and hope in her chest. Sam was on the porch, sanding down a new sign he'd carved. It read, "Fletcher's Saloon and General Store." Underneath, in smaller letters, "Nursing services available." "You made a sign," Grace said. "Figured if you're going to be the town nurse, people should know where to find you." Sam set down his sandpaper. "Is that all right? I should have asked first." Grace set down the packages and kissed him. "It's perfect." That evening, after Rose was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table going over finances. The fire had destroyed 1/3 of Sam's inventory. Rebuilding would cost money they didn't have much of. "I can sell Daniel's watch," Grace offered again. "No." Sam's voice was firm. "That's yours. I'm not taking it." "But we need to be patient. The store will recover. Your nursing income will help. We'll make it work." Sam reached across the table and took her hand. "We're not desperate anymore, Grace. We have options." "What kind of options?" "The territorial government is investigating Duncan's business practices. If they find what I think they'll find, his assets might be seized, including the land he owns around my property. Land he acquired through extortion." Sam's grip tightened. "I'm not saying I want his money, but if the territory offers to sell me that land at a fair price, I'll buy it. Expand the store. Maybe open a proper restaurant upstairs. Grace studied his face. You've been thinking about this. For 5 years I've been surviving. Just getting through each day, trying to raise Rose, trying not to drown in grief. Sam's voice was quiet. But now you're here, and I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm planning, building, living. So am I, Grace whispered. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked across the table. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, the stove crackled. It felt like safety, like home. The next morning brought news that Martha had left on the dawn stagecoach, her belongings packed in 3 trunks. Reverend Walsh stopped by to confirm it. She didn't say goodbye to anyone, he said. Just paid her debts and left. Good riddance, Sam muttered. Perhaps. Reverend Walsh looked troubled. But Duncan's still here, and he's angry. Let him be angry. Sam, you should know he's been asking questions about the territorial investigation, about who provided evidence against him. He knows it came from someone in town. Grace felt cold wash over her. Sarah. He'll figure out it was Sarah. Possibly. I've warned her to be careful. But Duncan has resources. Friends in Helena. He could make trouble for her. Sam stood abruptly. Where is she now? At home, I think. Why? Because I'm going to make sure she's protected. Sam grabbed his coat. Grace, stay here with Rose. Lock the doors. Sam, if Duncan's dangerous. All the more reason to make sure Sarah's safe. She stood up for us. I'm not letting him punish her for it. Sam kissed Grace quickly. I'll be back in an hour. Don't open the door for anyone but me or Reverend Walsh. He left before Grace could argue. Reverend Walsh followed, promising to gather more men to help. Grace locked the door and went upstairs to check on Rose. The girl was at the window looking out. Where's Papa going? To help a friend. Is he in danger? Grace wanted to lie to protect Rose from worry, but she'd learned that children could sense dishonesty. Maybe, but he's being careful. Rose pressed her hand against the glass. Everyone I love is always in danger. Grace sat beside her on the bed. Rose, do you remember what I told you about being scared? That being scared doesn't mean you should run away. That's right. And do you know what else being scared means? You love something enough to be afraid of losing it. That's not weakness. That's strength. Rose turned to look at her. Are you scared now? Yes. But you're staying anyway. Yes. Rose nodded slowly. Okay, then I'll be brave too. They waited together by the window. 15 minutes passed. 20. Grace's hands were clenched so tight, her nails cut into her palms. Finally, she saw Sam returning with Reverend Walsh and 3 other men. They were escorting Sarah Chen, who carried a small bag. Relief flooded through Grace. She ran downstairs and unlocked the door. Sam came in, Sarah behind him. What happened? Grace asked. Someone threw a rock through her window last night, Sam said grimly. Left a note, said she should learn to keep her mouth shut. Sarah's face was pale but determined. I'm not leaving town. This is my home. You can't stay at your cabin, Sam said. Not alone. It's not safe. She'll stay here, Grace said. Both Sam and Sarah turned to look at her. We have an extra room. She stays here until this is over. I can't impose, Sarah started. You exposed Duncan's corruption at great risk to yourself. The least we can do is offer you a safe place to sleep. Grace looked at Sam. If that's all right with you? Sam nodded. More than all right. Sarah, you're welcome here as long as you need. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. They set her up in the room next to Grace and Sam's. Rose was delighted to have another person in the house. That evening, they all ate dinner together. Grace, Sam, Rose, and Sarah. It felt like family, like the kind of home Grace had never had growing up. After Rose went to bed, the adults sat at the kitchen table. Sam poured whiskey for himself and Sarah tea for Grace. How bad is Duncan's financial situation? Grace asked. Bad, Sarah said. "I cleaned his office for 2 years. I saw the ledgers. He owes money to banks in 3 territories. The mine's been losing money for 18 months. All those threats, all that pressure to buy property, he needed the land to secure more loans. So if the investigation shuts down his operation, he'll be ruined." Sarah took a sip of whiskey. "Which means he's desperate. And desperate men do desperate things." Sam's face was hard. "Then we stay alert. We watch each other's backs. And we make sure Duncan knows that if he comes after any of us, he comes after all of us." The next week passed in tense waiting. Grace saw patients during the day, a child with croup, a minor with an infected cut, an elderly woman with joint pain. Word spread that she was kind and competent. More people came, some paid with money, some with food, some with promises to help when the Fletchers needed it. Sam rebuilt the storeroom and restocked the shelves. Business picked up as people realized Martha was gone and they didn't have to fear gossip for shopping at Fletcher's. Rose continued her lessons with Grace, learning to read full sentences now. Sarah helped in the store, her quick mind perfect for inventory management. She and Rose formed an unexpected friendship, Sarah teaching the girl how to count money and make change. It felt almost normal, peaceful. Grace should have known it wouldn't last. On the 8th day, Duncan Cole came to the saloon. It was mid-morning. Grace was upstairs examining a patient, Mrs. Patterson's daughter, who had a terrible cough. She heard Duncan's voice through the floor and felt her stomach drop. "Sam Fletcher," Duncan said. "We need to talk. I've got nothing to say to you." "Then listen." Duncan's voice was cold. "The territorial investigation is going to fail. I've hired lawyers who'll prove the evidence was obtained illegally. Sarah Chen will be arrested for theft. The judge who ruled against me will be removed from the bench. And when it's all said and done, you'll sell me this building for half what it's worth, or I'll burn it down around your ears. Get out." "Not until you understand what you're facing. I own this town, Sam. I own the mine, half the council, and enough law enforcement to make your life hell. You embarrassed me in front of the judge, made me look weak. I can't let that stand." Grace heard the scrape of a chair. Sam's voice when he spoke was deadly quiet. "You're threatening my family." "I'm explaining reality. Your wife testified against me. Your daughter's nurse sorry your wife humiliated Martha Weaver. The Chinese woman who worked for me stole my private documents. There will be consequences. The only consequence is going to be you in a cell." Sam's voice rose. "Now get out before I throw you out." Grace couldn't take it anymore. She left her patient and hurried downstairs. Duncan stood in the middle of the saloon, face red with anger. Sam was between him and the stairs, hands clenched at his sides. "Grace, go back upstairs," Sam said. "No." Grace moved to stand beside him. "Duncan, the evidence against you was real. You bribed Reverend Walsh. You conspired with Martha Weaver. You tried to extort Sam's property. Those are facts. Facts that won't hold up in court." "Then let the court decide." Grace's voice was steady. "But until then, you're not welcome here. Leave." Duncan's smile was cruel. "You think you've won. You think because one judge ruled in your favor this is over. But I've been playing this game for 20 years. You're amateurs. And amateurs always lose." He turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him. Grace's legs felt weak. Sam caught her elbow, steadying her. "You all right?" "No, he's going to come after us again." "I know." "What do we do?" Sam pulled her close. "We do what we've been doing. We live. We work. We take care of each other. And we trust that justice will work out. What if it doesn't? Then we handle it. Together." Grace wanted to believe him, but Duncan's words echoed in her head. Amateurs always lose. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay beside Sam, listening to his breathing, feeling the warmth of his body next to hers. After an hour of staring at the ceiling, she got up and went to the window. The street was empty, but she could see a light in Duncan's office across the way. He was working late, planning something. Grace. Sam's voice was rough with sleep. Come back to bed. I'm scared. I know. He got up and came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. So am I. Grace leaned back against him. I keep thinking about what he said. That we're amateurs. That we don't know how to fight someone like him. Maybe we don't, but we know how to fight anyway. Sam rested his chin on top of her head. My wife is the bravest person I know. She came to a town that didn't want her saved. A dying child stood up to bullies and gossips and married a stubborn widower with more problems than prospects. If that's amateur, I'll take it over professional any day. Grace turned in his arms. When did you get so good with words? Since I fell in love with a woman who deserves to hear them. He kissed her, and for a moment Grace forgot about Duncan, about threats and danger and fear. There was only this: Sam's hands in her hair, his mouth on hers, the feeling of being wanted and protected and loved. When they finally pulled apart, Sam led her back to bed. Grace curled against his side, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. We're going to make it, she whispered. Yes, we are. Grace closed her eyes and chose to believe him. The next morning brought Reverend Walsh with news. The territorial government had completed its investigation. Duncan Cole was being charged with multiple counts of extortion, bribery, and fraud. His assets were frozen pending trial. How long until the trial? Sam asked. 6 weeks, maybe 8. Reverend Walsh looked troubled. Duncan's out on bond. He's free to move around town until then. So we wait. And we watch. Reverend Walsh turned to Grace. Mrs. Fletcher, I know this isn't easy, but you did the right thing. All of you did. After he left, Grace stood at the window again. Across the street, Duncan's office was dark, but she could feel him out there, waiting, planning his revenge. Rose came downstairs already dressed for the day. Mama, can we work on my reading? Mama. Grace's heart squeezed. Rose had been calling her that for a week now, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. Of course, sweetheart. They sat at the kitchen table with Rose's primer. The girl was reading well now, sounding out words she didn't know her finger following the text. Sam brought coffee and sat with them, just listening. Sarah came down and started preparing breakfast. The smell of bacon filled the air. It was so normal, so peaceful. Grace thought about Duncan's threat and refused to let him ruin this moment. They were building something here. A family. A life. And whatever Duncan tried, however he fought back, Grace was done running. She'd found her home, and she'd defend it with everything she had. 4 weeks passed before Duncan made his move. Grace had almost started to believe they'd won. Almost. She was treating a patient young Tommy Miller with a broken wrist from falling off his horse when she heard shouting from the street. Sam's voice raised in anger. Grace finished splinting Tommy's arm and hurried outside. A crowd had gathered in front of the saloon. Sam stood on the porch facing down 5 men. Duncan Cole stood behind them, arms crossed, watching with cold satisfaction. What's going on? Grace demanded. One of the men turned. She recognized him. Jake Morrison, one of Duncan's foremen. Mrs. Fletcher, we're here on behalf of the Silver Creek Mining Company. Your husband owes us money. That's a lie, Sam said. Jake pulled out a paper. Says here you ordered 6 barrels of whiskey from our warehouse, never paid for them. That's $75. I never ordered anything from you. I buy my stock from Helena. Your signature's right here. Jake held up the paper. Grace could see writing on it, but from this distance she couldn't tell if it was real or forged. Let me see that, Sam said. Jake handed it over. Sam studied it, his face going red. This isn't my signature. Someone copied it, but badly. Judge will decide that, Jake said. Until then, we're here to collect. $75, or we take equivalent merchandise from your store. You're not taking anything. Jake gestured to his men. They started toward the door. Sam moved to block them. Grace's heart hammered in her chest. "Wait," she said. Everyone turned to look at her. "You said the judge will decide. So take this to the judge. Let him examine the signature. If it's real, we'll pay. If it's fake, you leave us alone." Jake's eyes narrowed. "We got a right to collect debts. You've got a right to prove the debt exists first." Grace moved to stand beside Sam. "Reverend Walsh is right there. He can witness this discussion. Do you really want to break into a man's store in front of half the town? What kind of message does that send?" Jake looked back at Duncan. The mining company owner's face was unreadable. Finally, Duncan nodded once. "Fine," Jake said. "We'll take it to Judge Carr. But when he rules in our favor, we're coming back. And we'll take double." They left. The crowd dispersed slowly, people whispering among themselves. Grace felt her legs shaking. "That was a forgery," Sam said quietly. "Duncan's trying to bankrupt me before his trial." "I know. If the judge rules against us, he won't. Not if we can prove the signature's fake." Grace took his hand. "We'll fight this, just like we've fought everything else." But that night, lying in bed, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. Duncan was desperate, and desperate men didn't stop at forgery. She was right. 3 days later, Grace was in the store helping Sarah stock shelves when Rose came running in from outside, her face white with fear. "Mama! Papa, come quick! The mine!" They ran. Half the town was already there, gathered at the mine entrance. Black smoke poured from the shaft. Men shouted, some trying to organize rescue efforts, others just standing frozen. Grace pushed through the crowd. "What happened?" "Collapse," someone said. "Explosion. Maybe 15 men trapped inside." Grace's medical training kicked in. "We need to set up a triage station. Get blankets, water bandages. Anyone who comes out alive will need immediate care." She started organizing people. Sarah helped her, calm, efficiency, invaluable. Sam appeared with other men organizing rescue teams. "I'm going in," he said to Grace. "Sam, no. There are men dying in there. I've worked mines before. I can help." Grace grabbed his arm. "You could die. So could they." Sam cupped her face in his hands. "I have to do this. You know I do." Grace wanted to scream at him, to forbid it, to chain him to something solid. Instead, she kissed him hard. "Come back to me. Always." He disappeared into the smoke with 5 other men. Grace turned back to her makeshift hospital. Rose clung to her skirts, silent and terrified. The first survivors came out after 20 minutes. 3 men coughing, covered in soot. One had a broken leg, another severe burns. Grace worked on autopilot, cleaning wounds, setting bones, giving orders. More men emerged, then more. Each time Grace looked up, hoping to see Sam. Each time her heart sank when it wasn't him. An hour passed. Then 2. The smoke was getting worse. Someone said the supports were failing, that they needed to seal the mine entrance before the whole thing collapsed. "Not yet," Grace said. "There are still men in there." "Ma'am, if we don't seal it now, we'll lose everyone." 5 more minutes. "We don't have way." 5 minutes, Grace's voice rang out across the crowd. People stared at her. She didn't care. Sam was in that mine. She wasn't sealing him inside. 3 minutes later, figures appeared in the smoke. 4 men carrying a 5th between them. Sam was one of them. Grace's knees nearly buckled with relief. They brought out the injured man, barely conscious, his leg crushed. Sam collapsed against the mine entrance, coughing violently. Grace ran to him. "I'm okay," he rasped. "Check the others first." "The others have people. You have me." Grace examined him quickly. Burns on his hands, smoke inhalation, exhaustion. But alive. "You're going home." "I can help." "You're going home now, or I'll have these men carry you." Sam looked at her face and didn't argue. Grace worked for 6 more hours treating the injured. 13 men had been trapped. 11 survived. 2 bodies were still inside, probably would never be recovered. The mine was too unstable. When it was finally over, Grace walked home in a daze. Her dress was stiff with blood. Her hands shook from exhaustion. She found Sam and Rose in the kitchen. Sarah had fed them soup and put Rose in clean clothes. "The men who didn't make it," Sam said quietly. "Did they have families?" "One had a wife and 3 children. The other was unmarried." Sam closed his eyes. "We need to take care of them. The widow, the children." "We will." Grace sat beside him. "But right now you need to rest." "I keep thinking if that support had failed 5 minutes earlier, but it didn't." "Grace, I could have left you alone. Left Rose without a father. What was I thinking?" Grace took his burned hands gently. "You were thinking about saving lives. That's who you are. That's why I love you." Sam pulled her close. Rose climbed into Grace's lap. They sat like that, the 3 of them, while Sarah quietly cleaned the kitchen. 2 days later, Reverend Walsh brought news. The mine collapse hadn't been an accident. Someone had deliberately weakened the support beams, and evidence pointed to Duncan Cole. "He's trying to destroy the town," Sam said. "If the mine's condemned Silver Creek dies, everyone here depends on it." "The territorial government is sending marshals," Reverend Walsh said. "They'll arrest Duncan tonight." But Duncan was already gone. His office was empty, his belongings packed. He'd fled before the marshals arrived, heading east toward the territorial border. "He'll get away," Grace said bitterly. "Maybe," Sam said. "But he's ruined. His company's seized his assets, frozen his name, destroyed. He can run, but he's got nothing left to come back to." Grace wanted to feel victorious. Instead, she just felt tired. How many people had to get hurt before Duncan was stopped? How close had they come to losing everything? That night she dreamed of the mine, of Sam disappearing into smoke and never coming out. She woke gasping, reaching for him in the dark. "I'm here," he murmured, pulling her close. "I'm right here. I could have lost you, but you didn't. Sam, I can't if something happened to you. Nothing's going to happen to me." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "We're safe now. Duncan's gone. Martha's gone. It's over." Grace wanted to believe him, but she'd learned that safety was fragile, that it could be taken away in a moment. She held him tighter and tried to believe anyway. The next weeks brought slow healing. The town mourned its dead miners. Grace helped the widow, a young woman named Clara, which made Grace's heart ache figure out how to support her children. The town pulled together, donating money and food. Sam's store became a gathering place. People came to buy supplies, but stayed to talk, to share news, to be around others who understood what they'd been through. Sarah proved invaluable managing inventory and customers with quiet efficiency. Rose continued growing stronger. She could read full chapters now. She'd made friends with Clara's oldest daughter, and the 2 girls played together while Grace visited the family. It felt like they were building something real, something that would last. Then, 6 weeks after Duncan fled, a man arrived on the stagecoach. He was well-dressed, carrying a leather case, and he went straight to Reverend Walsh's house. Sam got the summons an hour later. The man was a lawyer from the territorial government. He wanted to speak to Sam, Grace, and Sarah about the case against Duncan Cole. They met in the church. The lawyer, Henry Sutton, was middle-aged with sharp eyes and a kind face. "Duncan Cole is claiming the evidence against him was fabricated," he said without preamble. "He says Sarah Chen forged the documents, that Reverend Walsh was bribed to lie, that you, Mr. Fletcher, conspired to frame him for arson." "That's insane," Sam said. "I agree, but Cole has hired expensive lawyers. They're very good at creating doubt." Sutton opened his case and pulled out papers. "I need you to walk me through everything. Every conversation, every document, every witness. If there's any detail that doesn't add up, Cole's lawyers will exploit it." They spent 3 hours going over the story. Grace's arrival, Rose's illness, Duncan's threats, the fire, Martha's petition, the documents Sarah had found, every piece of evidence they'd gathered. Sutton made notes, asked probing questions. Finally, he sat back. "Your case is strong," he said. "But I'll be honest, Cole's lawyers will attack Sarah's credibility. They'll claim she had reason to lie, that she was angry at Cole for some perceived slight. They'll make her look unreliable." "That's not fair," Grace said. "She risked everything to expose him." "I know, but fair and legal aren't always the same thing." Sutton looked at Sarah. "Miss Chen, are you prepared to testify? To have your character questioned, your motives attacked?" Sarah's face was pale but determined. "I'll testify. Someone needs to stand up to men like Duncan Cole." "Good, because without your testimony, we don't have a case." After Sutton left, they sat in the empty church. Grace felt the weight of what was coming. Sarah would be torn apart in court, her reputation destroyed. And for what Duncan had already fled. Even if they won, he was gone. "Sarah, you don't have to do this," Grace said. "Yes, I do." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "My husband died working for Duncan Cole. Mine collapsed," Duncan said. "Accident," he claimed. But the supports were rotten. Everyone knew it. Duncan just didn't want to spend money fixing them. She looked at her hands. "My husband wasn't the first man to die in those mines. Won't be the last unless someone stops Duncan. But they might destroy you in the process." "Let them try." Sarah met Grace's eyes. "You stood up to this town for me. Now it's my turn." The trial was set for 3 weeks later in Helena. Sam, Grace, and Sarah made the journey by stagecoach. Rose stayed with Reverend Walsh, who promised to keep her safe. Helena was bigger than Silver Creek, with actual hotels and restaurants and paved streets. The courthouse was an imposing stone building that made Grace's stomach clench with nerves. Duncan Cole was already there with his lawyers, 3 men in expensive suits, who looked like they ate witnesses for breakfast. Duncan himself looked thinner, older. Defeat hadn't been kind to him. The trial lasted 4 days. Duncan's lawyers attacked every piece of evidence, questioned every witness. They painted Sarah as a vengeful employee with an axe to grind. They suggested Reverend Walsh was senile. They claimed Sam had business motives for framing Duncan. Grace testified about Duncan's threats about the fire, about Martha's petition. Duncan's lawyers tried to make her seem hysterical, emotional, unreliable, because she was a woman. "Mrs. Fletcher," the lead lawyer said with a condescending smile, "isn't it true that you were desperate when you arrived in Silver Creek, that you had nowhere else to go?" "Yes." "And isn't it true that Mr. Fletcher took you in, gave you shelter, eventually married you?" "Yes." "So you owe him everything, your home, your position, your security. You'd say anything to protect him, wouldn't you?" Grace met the lawyer's eyes. "I'd tell the truth to protect him, which is what I'm doing now. The truth as you see it. But how reliable is your perception? You were grieving your sister, displaced, vulnerable. I was also a trained nurse with a clear mind and a good memory. Duncan Cole threatened my family. He committed arson. He tried to extort my husband. Those are facts, not perceptions." The lawyer tried to break her testimony for an hour. Grace didn't budge. When it was Sarah's turn, Duncan's lawyers were brutal. They brought up her race, suggested she was lying because Chinese people couldn't be trusted, implied she'd stolen from Duncan before. Sarah sat in the witness box, hands folded, and answered every question calmly. Yes, she'd worked for Duncan. Yes, she'd entered his office without permission to copy documents. No, she hadn't forged them. No, she had no reason to lie, except that she'd seen Duncan destroy too many lives, and someone needed to stop him. By the end of her testimony, even Duncan's lawyers looked tired. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Grace sat in the courthouse holding Sam's hand, barely breathing. This was it. Everything they'd fought for came down to 12 strangers deciding who to believe. When the jury returned, the foreman stood. "We find the defendant Duncan Cole guilty on all charges." Grace felt Sam's hand tighten on hers. Guilty. They'd won. Duncan's face went white. His lawyers immediately started talking about appeals, but the judge, a stern woman named Margaret Hartley, silenced them with a look. "Mr. Cole," she said, "you used your position to terrorize a community. You extorted money, committed arson, endangered lives. The evidence against you is overwhelming. I'm sentencing you to 15 years hard labor." Duncan stood shakily. For a moment his eyes met Grace's across the courtroom. She saw hate there. And something else. Fear. Then the marshals led him away. Outside the courthouse, Grace couldn't stop shaking. Sam pulled her close. Sarah stood nearby, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," Sam said. "It's really over." Grace buried her face in his chest. "We won. We did." They spent one more night in Helena, celebrating quietly in the hotel restaurant. The next morning they took the stagecoach home. Rose was waiting on the saloon porch when they arrived. She ran to them and Grace caught her up, spinning her around. "Did you win?" Rose asked breathlessly. "We won," Grace said. Rose whooped and hugged them both. Reverend Walsh appeared smiling. Half the town had gathered in the street wanting to hear the news. Sam told the story. How Sarah had testified bravely, how Grace had refused to be intimidated, how the jury had seen through Duncan's lies. People cheered. Someone brought out whiskey. An impromptu celebration broke out in the street. Grace stood on the porch watching her town, and it was her town now come together in joy. Sarah was surrounded by people thanking her. Sam was shaking hands accepting congratulations. Rose was dancing with her friend Clara's daughter, both girls laughing. This was what she'd run from for 3 years. Community. Connection. The risk of caring and being cared for. She'd been so afraid of losing people that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have them. That night, after Rose was asleep and Sarah had retired to her room, Grace and Sam sat on the porch. The stars were brilliant overhead. The town was quiet again. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked. Grace leaned against him. "That I almost ran from this. That if I'd left that first night, if I'd given in to Martha or Duncan or my own fear, I would have missed all of this." "But you didn't run." "No, I stayed. And I'm so glad I did." Grace turned to look at him. "I love you, Sam Fletcher. I love Rose. I love this ridiculous town and our saloon, and even the difficult parts. I love the life we're building." Sam kissed her softly. "I love you too. And I promise I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice staying." Grace smiled against his lips. "You already have." They sat together as the night deepened, planning the future. Sam wanted to expand the store, maybe buy some of Duncan's seized properties. Grace wanted to formalize her nursing practice, maybe bring in a real doctor eventually. Rose needed proper schooling. Maybe they could hire a teacher for the town. There was so much to do, so much to build. But they had time now. Time and safety and each other. Grace thought about the woman who'd arrived in Silver Creek 4 months ago. Broken, frightened, running from everything. That woman would barely recognize who Grace had become. Someone brave. Someone rooted. Someone who'd found her place in the world and defended it with everything she had. 3 weeks later, Grace was examining a pregnant woman in her makeshift clinic when Rose burst in. "Mama, come quick! Papa needs you!" Grace's heart jumped. She followed Rose outside. A wagon had pulled up in front of the saloon. Sam was helping someone down, a woman clearly ill, leaning heavily on him. "She collapsed at the mercantile," Sam said. "I think it's her heart." Grace took charge immediately. They got the woman inside onto a bed. Grace examined her racing pulse, shortness of breath, fluid in her lungs. Heart failure, almost certainly. She worked for 2 hours administering medicine, making the woman comfortable. The woman's name was Ellen. She'd come to Silver Creek looking for work, nowhere else to go, just like Grace once. When Ellen was finally stable and sleeping, Grace went downstairs. Sam was at the bar looking worried. "She'll live," Grace said. "But she needs rest. and someone to look after her. "She can stay here," Sam said without hesitation. Grace smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Because that's who they were now. People who didn't turn others away. People who understood that everyone deserved a place to belong. Grace looked around the saloon. At Sarah behind the counter managing the evening crowd. At Rose doing her homework at a corner table. At the miners and workers who came here not just for supplies, but for community. This was what they'd built. Not just a business. Not just a home. But a place where people were safe. Where they were valued. Where they belonged. Grace had spent 3 years running from herself, from her grief, from the fear of losing anyone else she loved. She'd thought staying meant risking everything. Now she knew the truth. Running was what cost everything. Staying was what made life worth living. She crossed to Sam and took his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me stay. For fighting for me. For building this with me." Sam pulled her close. "You're the one who built it. I just gave you a place to start." "We built it together," Grace corrected. "And we're going to keep building. For Rose. For this town. For everyone who needs a place to belong." Sam kissed her forehead. "Together." Grace looked out the window at Silver Creek. The town that had rejected her, fought her, finally accepted her. The town that was home. She'd come here looking for her sister. Instead, she'd found herself. Found a family. Found a purpose. She'd found everything she'd spent 3 years running from, and she was never letting it go. This was her home, her family, her life, and God help anyone who tried to take it away again.